Boy, that's smooth, but technology's always fun. Again, my name is Beth Pratt, and I just want to thank Carol and SNARL for having me. I can't think of a better place to do a talk for me. You'll see from my videos, I love the Eastern Sierra and the High Sierra. For me, it is home. I was so excited that Toga Pass opened yesterday. Yes, I'm sure you guys are too. To me, that is the start of my happy season where I can get to the high country and a lot of the animals I'm going to talk about today. So I'm going to talk about two things today, and we'll leave some time for questions. The first thing is, as Carol mentioned, I work on wildlife crossings. And indeed, one of my colleagues was Katie. She's probably hiding. Oh, no, front row. Wow, you weren't hiding. Rodriguez is somebody who is leading and some crossings out here on 395 I'll talk about, as well as the Wallis Annenberg and some other crossings you might not know about. But the bulk of the talk will be about Yosemite wildlife, this book that I've been working on for 30 years now that is going to be out in October, and the legacy of Joseph Grinnell, which is really what my vision was for this book. So we'll dive into the stories of wildlife that are going to be contained there, that really Grinnell's book in 1924, which I'll get into, was, although it was a science book, it was a lot of storytelling in it. So, and again, I'll leave some room for questions at the end. So, but I'm always going to lead with a pika. It is one of my favorite animals. But I also just wanted to talk a little bit about my work because, oh, there we go. Oh, right there. Who had the nails?
I used a knife.
Oh, that's good. There we go. Look at that. Yay, it worked. Okay. So my life is split between my happy place of being out in the middle of nowhere at 12,000 feet above tree line in the High Sierra and having to work in LA. If you had told me, even 15 years ago that I'd be spending late in my career time in Hollywood preserving the dating lives of cougars, I would have laughed at you. But indeed, that's how it happened. I'm a national park girl and always have been since then. I'll talk a little bit about that. But I have since become very convinced, both scientifically and socially, that our cities and urban areas are also very key to preserving biodiversity. And it's been quite a journey to do that. I don't think, Hollywood is the most natural place for a lot of us, but I've come to love it. I've come to love LA. I think that they are doing really astounding things for wildlife, perhaps in a different way you'd do in a Yosemite, but just as important to maintaining biodiversity. And my talk is really one of hope, but I do just want to open up with, we are in a crisis. I mean, I'm guessing everybody in this room knows this. And I'm not even talking about the political crisis, although I could. And I'm sorry I have never been more furious in my life and never thought at age 56 I'd have to be on CNN defending national parks, but here we are. But the bigger crisis, that predates this administration, is biodiversity is collapsing. So it is really, we really have to be starting to think differently and bigger. And so that's what I mean, in that we can't write off places like Hollywood or LA or cities or as being not okay for wildlife. We have to look at solutions. And that was what I started doing, and it was this mountain lion, who knows P22? Yeah. That sort of changed my mind a lot. P22 is a famous cat that lived in Griffith Park, and he pretty much became the poster cat for what fragmentation in our freeways do. He lived an incredible life in Griffith Park for 10 years, which is, he was 12 when he passed away, which is an extraordinarily long life for a male. But he showed us what was possible and also showed us what the problem was, which is these freeways are dooming these mountain lions and others. So he launched a movement, and I think what I love is that movement hasn't stopped, and it's to build crossings. If you had told me I'd be talking to Spicoli from Fast Times at Ridgemont High about, Hollywood's a strange place, but it was really wonderful to see celebrities come together. Mel Gibson's divorce lawyer was a donor. David Crosby was an early supporter and became a friend. And again, this is not a natural space for me. I'd show up at these Beverly Hills party with a backpack on, and they'd be like, "Are you hiking?" I'm like, "No, that's just my purse," but that's okay. But it was wonderful to see how P22 and the notion of, sort of fixing this issue of animals being hit on roads sort of cross-cut any socioeconomic, political, you name it, boundary. I will say, Governor Newsom, no matter what you think of him politically, is a wildlife guy, and I cannot thank him enough. His dad, talk about the bipartisan nature, or what used to be the bipartisan nature of wildlife and nature. His dad worked with Ronald Reagan to help protect mountain lions in this state, and he had a pet otter named Potter. I just love that. But he's been really instrumental in the Wallis Annenberg and other crossings. And think about how many governors would tweet out, "A mountain lion will always have my heart." And here we are. P22 really launched this movement, but P22 captured the hearts of people like Governor Newsom, like Wallis Annenberg and others, to make this public-private partnership for a crossing that is, $100 million to do, a reality. And I'm really proud of it. It is an amazing project. Here's a shot of it from about 2 months ago. Wow, has anybody here driven under it? If you're, the LA area, it's something. I mean, this is a statement that even freeways are redeemable, and that the world came together to not just save a population of mountain lions that were at risk of extinction, but to reconnect an ecosystem for all wildlife. And boy, I can't think of anything more hopeful than that, right? Over one of the world's busiest freeways. This is not where you usually do a habitat restoration project, right? But here we are. This is what it'll look like when it's done. It pretty much seamlessly blend the habitat into, right over the freeway. And as I said, it's being designed for everything from mountain lions to monarch butterflies. So it's a really hopeful project. We just put the first soil on. That was April? No, my birthday, March 31st. That was something, because to date it's been just kind of really engineeringly concrete-y things, with 26 million pounds of concrete to pour the supports for that. But this is the first nature going on the crossing. And we've been growing in our native plant nursery. You can see all the intricate layers to put a habitat on top of this thing. It was not easy. But we've been growing in our plant nursery for 2-3 years now, plants gathered from 1 million hyperlocal seeds to put on top of that. So it's really an exciting time for this wildlife crossing that is really setting a model for the world, which is exciting. But we didn't want to stop with one, and Wallis Annenberg, after her crossing broke ground, said, "Beth, I want to do more." And I'm like, "I'm in." So we launched California Wildlife Reconnected, and a new nonprofit I formed, the Wildlife Crossing Fund, to do more in California and beyond. In fact, I just got back, if you follow me on social media, from a 4,000, actually I think a 6,000 miles, because I had to drive back and forth, road trip driving across Idaho, Colorado, Nevada, Utah, New Mexico, and Wyoming. And again, it was wonderful to see the bipartisan support for these crossings. It gave me hope. But I wanted to just talk about a few closer to home. This is one of my favorite crossings, although Katie, I'm sorry, and that's Katie right there. I don't want to screw this up. Where's the laser? Let's see. Is it the red thing? Yep, there's Katie. This was my favorite crossing ever. It's the Yosemite Toad crossing on 108. Until I visited the tarantula crossing in Colorado, Katie. Sorry, they have a crossing for tarantulas in Colorado. I mean, you cannot get any better than that. But this was on our road trip. That is Nat Geo photographer Steve Winter, who took the famous photo of P22, trying to get a photo of a Yosemite Toad crossing. But this is a really cool, if you drive over 108 on Sonora Pass, you can check it out. And it has really helped with the frog, the Yosemite toad slaughter that used to, and I'll talk more about the toad in my presentation. This is another project, Katie, I believe you worked on as well. I think this is like the Katie project show here. This was finished last year. It is down near the Sonora Pass Junction. How many underpasses did we put in? 2. And a very easy solution to help wildlife navigate that, that busy road. And then the one I think we're really excited about has not been done yet, but I have pledged my support to help Where's Stacy? Stacy Corliss from, so many others. Katie's been working on it to get the Mammoth 395 Wildlife Crossing projects done. It's still in its earliest stages. However, we were, Caltrans got a Wildlife Conservation Board grant, right, Katie? So that funds the design. And we were unsuccessful at getting a Wildlife Crossings federal pilot grant last year for construction, but don't give up. This, we are going to help to get the construction funded, and there's such a great stakeholder group that's working towards this. So we had a design workshop. We got a grant last year, and really took a look with some experts from all around the world, as well as stakeholders on the project, to take a look at how to design it and what would be the best for the wildlife. And there we are, Katie, at the deer migration sign. So anyway, this is going to come to fruition. It is going to happen. Okay. I'll do questions at the end, but that was sort of the, Carol wanted me to at least touch on the wildlife crossing work, but again, happy to take questions on that at the end as well, or give you my email. To me, connectivity is everything. We can preserve these landscapes. And when I was coming up in conservation, the definitive mode was you put aside a Yosemite, you put aside a Yellowstone, you put aside a little park here, some open space here. Check the box, you're done for wildlife. We now know that wasn't right, and that's what I love about science. When we're wrong, we adjust. Connected landscapes, even in the best protected places on the planet, like a Yosemite, wildlife is not doing great because they do not recognize boundaries. And these boundaries that pretty much prevent them from traveling, prevent them from migrating, prevent them from accessing food, water, mates, you name it, have been devastating. There's an incredible book out by my friend Ben Goldfarb called Crossings, made the New York Times bestseller list, all about how these roads have just devastated biodiversity and ourselves. I don't think have reckoned with the moral cost of driving yet for both people or wildlife. So these crossings are everything to connect landscapes, especially with the challenges they're facing with climate, you name it. But I'm going to shift gears now and talk about Yosemite and Grinnell's legacy. And so this is why it's even more unusual for me to be working in a place like LA. This is a list I made when I was, I think about 10 or 11. And I love national parks. I grew up in Massachusetts, so we didn't have really big mountains. We didn't even have wildlife when I was growing up. We had the best I could hope for in my suburb of Boston was coyotes and squirrels and birds, and frogs was my gateway animal. But now they've all come back. It's great. Coyotes, deer, bobcats, everything in the neighborhood I grew up in. But at the time when I was there, we didn't have it. So I kind of longed for these incredible landscapes. That's a book I still have that my parents bought me when I was little, and made these lists. And I feel really fortunate because that dream was fulfilled when I graduated from college in '91, headed out west, and have been really fortunate. Worked in Yellowstone National Park for 4 years. But it really is Yosemite, where I have resided outside the park for 26 years now on the west side. I worked there for a decade for it's now the Yosemite Conservancy, but I was vice president of the Yosemite Association at the time, and just fell in love. It was love at first sight, and the love affair has deepened. But for me, it's the wildlife. The geology's great and Half Dome's beautiful, but as I put in the introduction to this book, Half Dome is also someone's home. And I love living among wildlife. This is a compilation of last summer and fall mountain lion visits I had. Wait for it. This is 100 feet from my house. So I love sharing my space with all manner of wildlife, and that this wildlife also uses the park, right? So I am, by making my house, my property wildlife friendly, helping a lot of the park's wildlife, everything from butterflies who migrate to birds to mountain lions that travel vast distances, 100, 150 square miles is their territory. So I, in doing these talks, and the one takeaway I always like to say is, you are part of these national parks. You are part of these open spaces. We are all connected. The wildlife don't know boundaries. So And, I call my little property Sunshine Hill National Park, but it's great to live with mountain lions. But even though I live at about 3,000 feet, I would live at 12,000 feet if I could. I love the high country, and this is a couple quotes from my book that just the special of the high country. I'm guessing again, this audience, I am preaching to the choir here. There's just something about the Sierra Nevada above tree line or even a little below it that has really captured my imagination and many. But what it also has captured the imagination for me is the incredible wildlife that lived there. And in the book, Yosemite Wildlife, there's a few chapters on these alpine environments and the incredible wildlife that survived there. I'm guessing for this audience, a lot of these landscapes are familiar, but I do like to start out with where I explore in my study area, where I am at least once a week, because it really does help put the wildlife I'm going to talk about in the context of the landscape. Once Toga Pass opens, is usually doing a survey about once or twice a week for butterflies, pika, Yosemite toads, basically for any wildlife, especially up in the alpine environment. And this is one really special area, the Gaylor Lakes Basin. That's Granite Lakes right there, and then Middle Gaylor Lake, or just Gaylor Lake, is to the left there. Oh, wrong print. Here is what I call Pika Hill. This is Gaylor Lake, and this is a really great pika area right here, where if you're hiking there, you might see me. Again, I'm usually sitting there watching the pika once a week. I thought I'd play you a little videos of these areas too. This is a really important butterfly area, which you'll see later. But this is a ridge above Gaylor Lake. And again, you look at these beautiful landscapes, which to us are really scenic, but then you think about the wildlife that actually makes a home here, which for most of the year, this is under snow. This is just another view of that landscape. This is another area. For me, it really is surveying that area around Toga Pass country called the Dana Plateau. I think this is one of the most magical places on the planet. The last few glaciations missed this area, so you're essentially walking on a landscape that has been untouched by major forces for 25 million years. It is a really special place. That is Glacier Canyon with Mount Dana. This is a 360 view from the top, about 12,000 feet is the ridge, sort of the top of the Dana Plateau, which stretches for 2 miles. And there is some incredible wildlife up there eking out a living, snowshoe hares. I've seen coyotes up there. It's a really incredible place. Is that waving for you guys too? Yeah, wow. I thought I was tripping out. I'm like, I didn't think I was that tired. Yeah. I play this video too because this is what makes the Dana Plateau amazing. These are rocks at the top. I call this the Garden of Rocks, which literally have, again, been shaped over millions and millions of years just by sand and wind and water and time. And they're sculptures. They're so otherworldly. Yet you'll see butterflies and rosy finches and pika and snowshoe hares making their homes on these incredibly sculptured rocks. So if you haven't been up there, it is definitely worth a trip. Skip through this. And then just the other place I survey regularly is the Kuna Crest, which starts at Mammoth Peak, not to be confused with Mammoth Mountain here, which is in Yosemite National Park. And this is a delightful place too. This is the place where I see an incredible amount of wild bears. Nobody goes up there, so it's a very unpeopled landscape. Here's just some shots of it. That's Bingham Lake. Let me just skip. So those are the places that, as Robert Redford say, really claim me. I just think Yosemite National Park is one of the most beautiful places on the planet. But again, there's something that spoke to me about the wildlife that makes it home. And this was from my first visit. In 1992, I had moved to California in 91, but didn't have a four-wheel drive until I bought a car later that year. And this is my first visit to the park, and what a visit. They had actually closed the road after I went in to all but four-wheel drive vehicles, and I had Yosemite Valley almost to myself. When do you ever have Yosemite Valley to yourself? And I was making a snowman, and that coyote, it was literally the first coyote I'd ever seen in the wild. We didn't have coyotes in Massachusetts at the time. and stopped and watched me, and it was just such a great experience. I wrote about it, and it was from that day forward in 1992 that I said, I want to write a book about this park's wildlife. And that took me down a decades-long project to do so. I made the next year kind of a homemade book. This was before we had Facebook and blogs and stuff. So this is 93. And from that, started working on taking notes, doing research, doing observations, reading everything I could, started doing writings. I started a blog on Yosemite wildlife. And really took seriously once I found out and discovered, once you go down the rabbit hole of research, the world opened about what Yosemite was. And Joseph Grinnell was front and center. He published a book, which is my Bible. I would have brought it, except I'm hiking tomorrow and didn't want to leave it in the car, called Animal Life in the Yosemite in 1924. And believe it or not, nobody has ever published a book since focused just on Yosemite wildlife. We have field guides, we have books on Yosemite, but nothing just on the wildlife like he did. And interestingly enough, at the time, there hadn't been a book either on Yosemite wildlife. This book was, and his research were quite incredible. And again, he noted at the time this incredible gap that, there's all these books about Half Dome and the scenery, and everybody loves birds, but really nobody knows what's going on there in the park as far as the biodiversity. And so Joseph Grinnell and Tracy Irwin Stora and actually a whole host of scientists not only did a book, but took on an incredible project that led to this book. Here's some photos of my book. It's the whole text is online if you want to check it out. It is a snapshot in time that we rarely have, right? A whole cross-section of biodiversity from 100 years ago. The only thing I don't like that he did is they killed everything they saw for specimens. We don't do that now. But this is incredibly important because obviously it informs our work today, right? This is his stats, which I can say I've pretty much matched, except for the 2,700 specimens. I have not collected anything dead, thankfully. But this historical record is helping us today know how to deal with things like climate change and development and you name it, because it isn't just used then. In fact, Grinnell had the foresight back then to say the biggest value of animal life in Yosemite in our years-long survey isn't going to be realized until 100 years from now. And he was right. They did, UC Berkeley partnered with the National Park Service and others to do a Grinnell resurvey. So 100 years later, they do a transect, which of course taught us an awful lot. And so for me, it became even more imperative to continue that legacy of Grinnell. They did the science, but we also need to do the book because it helps us. This is what the Grinnell survey benefited from, right? You can take a photo from the 1915 survey and then compare it 100 years later from the resurvey. And now we have information about how climate's changing, how the wildlife's changing, how the flora and fauna is changing in these areas. I don't know of another park that has this, and especially with the environmental challenges we're facing, this has become even more critical. So it's not just a pretty book. And for folks like me who's a geek about this stuff, when I said I survey Gaylor Lakes, I don't just survey it for the animals, but what are the conditions every year? And here's a short video that shows you the changing snowpack year to year. And you can see the swings. And so this impacts wildlife, everything from butterflies to the Yosemite toads to the larger wildlife who feed on wildlife that depend on, it just goes on. And although wildlife in California are adapted to boom and bust, right? California is a state where drought is part of our part of our makeup. It's part of what animals have adapted to. What they can't handle is the climate whiplash. I mean, when you look at, and Katie, remember this, these the summer to winter of 2022, 2023, we had a major fire in Mariposa, where I almost lost my home, and record heat. It was 114 degrees at my house at 3,000 feet. That probably hadn't happened in 5,000 years. I literally had the deer trying to get in my house. Acorn woodpeckers were gasping at the bird baths, right? You then go into a winter that I know all of us, if you lived here, remember. I had 3 feet of snow at my house, which was not as much as I'm sure some of you have, but it had not snowed 3 feet at my house again, probably in 1,000 years, who knows? And then you flip back into major flooding, right? Again, climate change is a scientist I work with, Rob Grasso, said it's not something that just happens once. It keeps happening. And the wildlife have a hard time adapting. This is when Katie and I surveyed the Pica site, that's the Geller Lakes again, to get up there. This was June 29th, I think. It was the end of June. Look at those sun cups. Have you ever seen anything like them? We had to traverse that to get up to our place. It's insane. But, you know, that was just us. I mean, again, you think of the wildlife, and then you look at population trends resulting from this. Both, you know, some animals benefit, some animals don't. So all this is the story behind this 30-year project, which I literally just sent off the last corrections for the manuscript. It goes to press next week. So, boy, I'm actually going to have a fun summer this year. 460 pages, 300 photographs, 150 species we feature. And unlike Grinnell, who, although he featured 700 species in his book, we did feature insects. We featured other animals that he didn't. So we really kind of opened it up a little bit. The Yosemite Conservancy, I can't thank enough. They really invested in this project and gave it a fitting legacy that Grinnell and all his colleagues deserved to continue that. I also can't thank Rob Hirsch enough. Some of you may know him from A Visual Journey, a book that he published in Yosemite. As I was getting closer to finishing this, I was like, you know, instead of having multiple, you know, just using stock photography, I wonder if we just use photographs from one person. And Rob agreed to step up to the challenge, although even he could not get all of the animals. So we still had to use some of our friends, but his photography, as I'm sure you'll agree, is amazing. Here's a couple samples. And you'll also, as I go through the animals, be able to pinpoint very clearly which are his and mine, because I am not a photographer. The quality stands out pretty phenomenally, but I'm really proud to have him providing the photos for the book. This is, you are literally the first people to see this outside of the project team. This is just what went off to press, and you can see this is the chapter list that covers, you know, a diversity of animals. Invertebrates included, butterflies, you know, the Sierra Nevada red fox. And what it really tried to focus on in this book, again, in trying to continue Grinnell's legacy, was not all the wildlife, but what is the wildlife that is uniquely Yosemite or has unique stories within the Yosemite or the Sierra Nevada landscape? And that helped narrow it down a bit. Because although the American robin I love robins in my yard, you know, everybody knows about them. They don't need as much ink as, say, the Mount Lyell salamander, which we'll get to. So that helped narrow down the species that we focused on. It is, again, another stunning photo from Rob. The book itself, I was really purposeful. It took me years to narrow down what to include. But we have interviews from everybody like Yvonne Chenard, who, I'll give away a secret of the book. I didn't know this. He started rock climbing when he was a teenager because he was part of his high school falcon club, and he wanted to be where the falcons were. So we have Patagonia today because of wildlife. When he told me that, I said, you have to be kidding me, Yvonne. This is a great story. Nobody knows this. We have, I went into the archives, and we have published stuff that people have really never seen before, like these wildlife observation cards that were like high on a shelf and nobody used. It's pretty amazing. We also I went through 100 years of Yosemite nature notes, and we excerpt from those as well as the animal life in the Yosemite. We have, I'll tell you, I assembled the best bibliography you will ever see on the Sierra Nevada and Yosemite. It took a long time. I think it's 50 pages, I forget. Yeah, it's nuts. But most important to me, or I should say important to me, was the voices of people who represent from all times the legacy of Yosemite wildlife, whether it be the indigenous people, whether it be scientists over the years, rock climbers, early naturalists like Enid Michael. You know, I just didn't want it to be about my voice. I wanted to curate the voices over the last 100 years that were really important in Yosemite wildlife. So after you read it, let me know if I did a good job. But the biggest stories, of course, I wanted to tell for the wildlife. So let me tell you some of these stories that I uncovered. Some of them you may know, some of them you may not. But I'll tell you, this was my favorite part, is even I, who had been at the time when, you know, had been hiking in Yosemite for decades, when I started researching in earnest this book, like really going into the archives, I couldn't believe some of the wildlife I didn't even know existed in the park, or wildlife I knew existed but I didn't know about some of the stories. So the Mount Lyell salamander, who's heard of this salamander? All right, we got some herps people here. Thank you. This, I think, notice I'm starting out with herps, not starting out with megafauna. So this is one of the coolest critters in the park, I will say. This is, for Grinnell and Storer to say, the greatest event of their survey scientifically was a small salamander. That's saying something. I like Grinnell and Storer. They were herps people, which is great. This incredible little salamander, let me play a little video, they found up on the slopes of Mount Lyell. You know, I mean, think about that. They did not expect to find a salamander there. They were actually setting out traps for small mammals and find these little guys. Like, look at that. These animals are a biogeographic mystery because there are, I think it's 5 species just in California. There's actually an endangered one right near where I live in Mid-Pines called the limestone salamander. But these guys, you have to go to Europe otherwise to find anything analogous to them. So how did they get up on Mount Lyell and on the top of Half Dome? Nobody knows. Obviously probably something to do with glaciation, but it's still a mystery. And these folks, and I can't play this video, but Google it. These salamanders, because they live in these rocky areas, have some incredible adaptations to enable them to survive. If you're living on the top of Half Dome, as Robert Stebbins, a very famous person who studied herps and wrote many books on them, said, if you live on Half Dome, you can appreciate the importance of sure-footedness. These guys have a stub tail that they use as a walking stick, but perhaps their best adaptation is they roll into a ball to perhaps, you know, escape rock slides or to escape predators. It is pretty cool. Like I said, you can Google the video. It's quite something to see this little salamander rolling a ball down rocks. So these records just kept coming in, you know, even after Grinnell discovered them. And even modern day, here's Jim Snyder, who is a historian of the park. They found a population of salamanders on Half Dome, which for a while was like, you know, what do? Do we limit, you know, people going up there because of this? But you can find them, you know, wet, moist areas, high elevation, rocky. I've never seen one, but I can't wait to. They are a pretty cool animal and one of the coolest stories. Now, I don't know what's going on with Mount Lyell, but there's a second really cool, rare animal on Mount Lyell that Grinnell and Storer wrote about in their book, but they only found dead specimens. Well, this, and I'm so happy that this photo came so we could get it in the book. My friend Vishal and his colleagues just completed a study. Actually, the study was outside the park in the Lee Vining area. The first photographs of the Mount Lyell shrew alive in history. This is look at that little guy. They are pretty cute. all they really knew about Grinnell and Storer, which actually this recent study challenged, is that Grinnell associated them with moist situations. But just based on the early results from this study, they're questioning if that's always holding up. But they're a pretty cool animal. And what I also love is somebody who tries to get more people to care about wildlife. This thing went nuts. This is what I love happens, right? Who cares about a shrew normally except for us wildlife geeks? Well, apparently everybody did. This is my favorite headline. You know, I love it when they get creative, the framing of the shrew. But, you know, this isn't just important because of a photograph, but again, with the changing climate, other environmental challenges, we need to know more about this animal to make sure that they survive. So I'm really looking forward to some of the things that come out of their research. I will give you one thing that they told me that actually didn't make the book. I didn't put it in. But the shrews actually kind of like to cuddle. They had to keep them alive. They did not want, like, you know, again, Grinnell would just kill these things. That was back in a different time. But so they fed them every 2 hours, right, so that they could keep these shrews alive. And apparently they like to cuddle. So who knew shrews like to cuddle? We are getting to my favorite animal, which, if it's not apparent, people think cougars are my favorite animals, and it's close, but I have to give it to the pika. And you got to stop me because I will do an entire 4 hours on this animal if you let me. But I just stopped and saw my first pika of the year on the way here. They are, I think, the most cutest and toughest animal on the planet. These guys are incredibly amazing. And, you know, Grinnell and Storer noted that they would, I love this, that they even howl at the moon. Isn't that amazing? Like a wolf. And indeed they do. These little guys, for those of you who've seen them in the wild, they're like little dogs, right? And I have little dogs and big dogs, but they have a sense of their own toughness outside of their size. So I totally believe that they howled at the moon. Here is one of Rob's photos from the book. And of course, I think it's pretty close, but I think the American pika gets the most ink in the book next to the Yosemite toad. So, but look at that little guy. I have been studying them now for about, 15 years, and I haven't even updated that, but that's 2,600 photos just from 2011 to 2020. Can you spot the pika here? I'll tell you, I picked an animal that is the hardest to see. Look at that thing. I mean, they are incredibly well camouflaged and suited to their environment. They soar over the rocks. I mean, these guys, if you've watched them, it is so hard. I mean, look at those little feetsies. And then this is how fast they move too. This is two of them kind of chasing each other off here. I mean, you can't even pan fast enough to, you know, I get dizzy just watching my own videos of them flying across the rocks. I'll tell you though, it's better than TV. I literally be like, 4 hours went by, I've been watching the pika play. And people think they're hard to see, but they're actually really social critters if you just stay still. They will come out, they're very curious, they want to know what you're doing. Look at them, they're like, we're playing. They're tough little critters. This is a pika, I do name them Sophie. And she lasted about 3 seasons. And this is me, I was eating lunch, and she'd come out and eat lunch with me. You know, she'd be like, all right, my turn too. Very cute little guy. And of course, this is what they sound like. This is Petey the pika. Look at that little guy. I mean, they're round and cute and they squeak. How can you go wrong with a pika? I mean, look at their butts. Oh my God. I mean, name an animal that has a cuter butt than that. I mean, geez, look at that. Little pajama bottom feet and cute butts. I know. It's like even their poop is cute. Look at that poop. It's these little round pellets. But even more than cute, their poop is actually, they're kind of historians. Their poop, because I forget what the technical term is, they poop twice, right? Like a lot of lagomorphs will. Their second poop, they actually, you know, like thousands of years, they've actually carbon dated it. So they can actually do some studies based on, you know, how long pika sites have been either extirpated or occupied based on pupa dating. This is in the Gale Lakes Basin, about 12,000 feet. I came across this latrine that probably was 100 years old. This thing went back forever. It's insane how much pica poop from those little guys. They also, if you didn't know, they don't hibernate. This is why I think they are one of the toughest animals out there. They gather food all summer, and they can make, I think it's like 15,000 trips once, in one summer. Put it in hay piles, and here's one gathering, and then that's what they eat in the winter. And they will make trips. That's a really sure way to feed them. They will make the same route, sometimes 100 times a day. So if you just sit there and figure out their route, it's really fun to watch them. And these are their hay piles. And their hay piles are different, much like if I walked into any of your pantries, right, it would all be different. Same with pica. Even two pica on the same hill may have a preference for certain foods, so their hay piles are different. But one thing they all do, which I find really interesting too, is for some of the plants that are toxic to them, those will lay in the right place in the hay pile so that by the time they get to it, those will have leached out and they can eat them safely. So these guys are pretty cool. Here's another hay pile. Here's just a great pica shot from Rob Hirsch, and this is another way to spot them. I call them their kingly thrones, and you can see they love these triangle rocks where, if it's a predator, they can slink down like this. So you just look for their kingly thrones if you want to spot them. Here's another one on another great Rob shot on a kingly throne. And they did spot, with climate change, pica is one of the ones impacted. The first sort of theory was that they do not like heat. That's why they live at higher elevations. And the first theory was it was going to get hotter and hotter until they go up to heaven and run out of space. It's a little more complicated than that. Some of these microclimates are doing okay, but it still is that we probably are not going to have pica in the Sierra in the next century. It's just the habitat's not going to be good enough for them. And that's why you used to see pica in Yosemite. Again, this is why the data from Grinnell is so important, about 7,000 feet. Now you rarely see them below 9 and even 10. All right, another amazing animal that we have here. How many have heard of the Yosemite toad? Yeah, this is such a cool guy. So that is Yosemite toad at Gaylor Lake who thought I was his date. And he came walking across the snow. At the time I took that, there was really not another photo of a Yosemite toad on snow. I'll tell you, I worked for that. Those sun cups were almost as bad as the one Katie and I were in. And this is what I love. Again, Grinnell and Store for the win on herps. The second biggest discovery was a herp, the toad. Right? Again, they don't care about megafauna. They love the little guys. This is, again, so unusual. We don't think of toads as walking over snow, right? We think of frogs, in these sort of warmer environments in our garden. Look at this guy. These guys are so fascinating and so mysterious. We still don't know a lot about them. They come out to their breeding grounds. In fact, I didn't hear any on Toga Pass, but it's about the time. Just for a few weeks every year, and then they disappear. We don't know much about their habits outside of their breeding grounds or anything. And they disappear to places you wouldn't even think. I was up on the Dana Plateau, far from any water, and this little Yosemite toad peeks out. People report them, non-breeding season in places that just boggle the imagination. They will walk up to a mile over snow and swim through cold water. I didn't even want to put my hand in that water. It was so cold. And this guy came over and was like, "Hey, baby." I was kind of complimentary to be mistaken for a toad, right? And this is what they sound like. I thought it was a bird the first time I heard it decades ago. Isn't that astounding? This is what they look like when they're mating. Sometimes they get in wrestling matches. And there's a new, my neighbor and friend, Steve Bumgarden, does the Yosemite Nature Notes, and they literally just released this a couple weeks ago. A nice video, 9 minutes on the Yosemite toad, lots of great footage. The last animal I'll focus on, and then I'm going to flip through and take questions, because I can never get through all the stories I want, but this is my passion as well, alpine butterflies. I love butterflies. I started studying them about 10 years ago. Near my home in the winter, in Mariposa. There's an incredible population that I study, but once the pass opens, I'm up high seeing what's there. And what I love is some of the same butterflies are migrating up, so I see them at both places. That is actually 2 swallowtails flying. I couldn't even believe I got the shot. It's not a great photo, but it shows you these butterflies are badass. I can't even get up these peaks without huffing and puffing it. And I think a lot of people don't assume they live in the high mountains, but they do. In fact, not only do they just live, they flourish. We have over 60 species in at least Yosemite and probably most of the Sierra that live either all or part of the time in the alpine environment, and I think it's half of them just live there. This I want to play for you. This I got last year, which to me gets at kind of interesting population dynamics. I've been surveying this place called Butterfly Hill. That's Saddlebag Lake in the background. And I had never seen this many butterflies. This is about 11,500 feet. It was 8 different species. It's just insane that they live in these rocky environments. So some of the species you might see up there, the anise swallowtail is one of my favorites because these guys hilltop. In fact, that hill, I'll show you kind of a wider view of it. The males will stay on their own hilltop for a month, and if you move them, they'll go back looking for a female. So these little butterflies guard a big mountain peak. I mean, that is awesome. And you see how the wind was blowing that day, and that little butterfly was hanging on. And this is the top of the Dana Plateau. There's also a rarer swallowtail that I've only seen twice. This is what it looks like for the Yosemite Butterfly Survey every year. This is one of the biggest prizes if you see one. This, though, wins the prize. The Avilda Arctic. You think pica camouflaged. Look at that friggin' butterfly against granite. It actually has evolved to match the color of granite. These guys live at the top of the highest peaks. They are a rare butterfly, although at certain times of year, they are everywhere. That was the first one I ever saw. Try spotting that. I was like, what is that in there? And there was just a paper released where they found some of these Arctics on the summit of Mount Whitney. You're a butterfly living on the summit of Mount Whitney. How incredible. We don't know what Grinnell and Storer thought about this because they ignored the butterflies, so that's one of my faults with them. Checker spots are butterflies that you'll find down low. I have them in Mariposa, but they are a butterfly that also goes up really high. This is the Dana Plateau. We don't think of butterflies flying over snow, but they indeed do. This is a Sierra Nevada checker spot, one of our sort of hometown. We also have a rock slide checker spot, which is really rare. The Sierra sulphur, a bird that has the smallest known range in North American butterflies right here at the Toga Pass area. It is a lovely butterfly. Look at that pink around it. And this is one of the only place in the world you can see it. Lustrous copper, I bet a lot of you have seen these. These will greet you in the spring. They're hard to miss. Look at that color, right? It's like an orange flower greeting you. And I love also in the alpine area for these butterflies, these little miniature gardens that they really subsist in. This is a Sierra blue, although they are not just endemic to the Sierra. They're also in up near Shasta and other places. But what a shot by Rob, capturing it on its host plant. The Parnassians are butterflies I'm sure you've seen. But this is the rare one, the Sierra Nevada. Just, again, another one that we find here. And then the California tortoiseshell is a really common butterfly, but I bet a lot of you remember migrations in the past that were probably in the thousands. I have not seen one in 10 years. Here's one of the last ones I recorded on the Dana Plateau. And these are butterflies whose numbers can fluctuate from year to year, but I am starting to get worried because they're just not being in the numbers they used to be. I'm going to skip through the rest of these just to touch on a few because I want to take questions. Well, I got to show the bear walking across Gaylor Lake if it'll play. Oh, it won't play. Bear rock climbing. This is my favorite photo in the book. Look at that northwestern pond turtle. What a great shot. alpine chipmunk, Sierra Nevada red fox, of course. Again, these are all stories you can read in the book. But I wanted to end on a really cool sighting I had. This, fairy shrimp, look at that. This is a cool one, too. The Yosemite Cave studio scorpion. Again, you'll have to read it to find out. I'll end on this one because this was such a cool sighting I had literally last fall. I was up surveying at Gaylor Lakes. This is about a little under 11,000 feet. And I had just seen a prairie falcon. And I'm walking, and I see this bird in a tree, and it literally flies by me enough I can feel the air. And I'm like, oh, it must be the prairie falcon. And then it lands like 50 feet from me and starts doing this. And I'm like, that's not a falcon. I'm like, is that a burrowing owl? What the hell? Sure enough, it was very rare in the Sierra. David Gaines, who I'm sure many of you recognize, his book is my Bible. I wish I had met him. Only cites one other sighting in the High Sierra on the Dana Plateau. The exact day of mine, September 24th or 5th, I can't remember, 40 years before. But this is not an animal you see here a lot, and I just thought it was an incredible sighting again. But when you think about it, the High Sierra, a lot like the Central Valley, at least in terms of openness and burrows. And in fact, Gaylor Lake, there's been a lot of badger activity in that basin in the last few years, or at least more than I've seen. That's perfect burrows for burrowing owls. So anyway, it was pretty interesting to see this guy, and what a story. Da, da, da. And you always end with marmot babies. If I had a video of pika babies, I'd show it. I don't, though. They're in their little cabin, but there's some marmot babies. Yosemite Wildlife will be out in October, and I hope you got a taste of these stories and why it's important, that the storytelling is important, but it is the storytelling combined with the science that is going to enable us to make sure that the next book on Yosemite wildlife in 100 years, that all of those animals are still on that table of contents. Anyway, thank you for spending time with me, and I'll take some questions if we have time. Yep. Oh, you got another one.
I have another
Look at magic, Carol.
Yeah, all right. I want to thank you, Beth, for that. And then just one other thing, too. Can you guys hear me? No. Hello? Hello? It's on. We can pass that around. We can just talk loud, too.
I'll repeat the question.
Yeah, when Beth was showing the photos of the snow, I just wanted to there we go.
There we go.
Where's Tom? Is he still here? No, he left. Thank Tom Painter, Airborne Snow Observatory, for sponsoring the seminar tonight and all the food and snacks. So yeah, thanks. And then I'll pass this around just so we can hear the questions on the video too. Anyone?
So we're in Mammoth over by Eagle, probably a little over 8,000 feet. We've been noticing the last couple of years just really loud frogs, and we don't have any water by our place. I don't know if they're frogs or toads, but I was just wondering maybe what kind they were. And then my wife also came across a dead owl up on right off of Chair 3 while we were snowboarding. She has a picture of it.
Oh, yeah.
We were
Hey,
wondering if you could identify it.
Yeah, I'd love to see the owl to see, but the frogs, ooh,
That was,
huh.
it's like a white owl. It's in the middle of the winter.
It was right in the middle of the run, right below Dave's run, actually.
Wow. That's not a borrowing, but anyway, I'll give you my email. I'd like to dive into that. I'm not sure, but poor guy. But the frogs, I can almost guarantee you are Pacific chorus or Sierra tree frogs. Their name has changed, in fact, keeps changing. Because even one of their original names was Pacific tree frogs, but they really don't climb trees. They are one of the most, they are featured in my book. I'm actually surprised. I just have so many stories, can't fit them all. They are one of the most common frogs in California. They live everywhere from sea level up to, they are in my rock climbing chapter because literally rock climbers will see them up the face of Half Dome.
But we get like 20 feet of snow. Where do they just
They
hibernate or
just
do they
hibernate.
freeze?
Yeah, so the only frogs we have, you would have in the mountain yellow-legged frog. They're really quiet. They actually are not real songsters. The Yosemite toad sounds like that trilling. The red-legged frog is lower, so this is really your only option. And again, they live at every elevation. They walk over snow. They're pretty amazing, but they're fairly small.
That's
but
the
they are
classic
loud.
frog sound.
Yes, and it's funny you say classic frog sound, because the fun fact about these guys, when you are watching a movie or a TV show and you hear a frog sound, it is the Pacific chorus frog. So the early Hollywood lots were located, before they developed it, on these kind of wetlands. And they'd go out back and record those frog sounds. So even if you're watching a frog in Africa, they usually play the Pacific chorus. So that's why it sounds familiar to you. That's why it is the classic frog. But yeah, I'll give you my email. That owl, God, I don't know, to be honest. But it looks, I almost want to say spotted, but what elevation are you at?
Right by chair 3 on top of the
Yeah,
top of chair
I'll give
3.
you my email's right there, or text it to me too. I'll get an ID for you.
I had a question for you about the wildlife crossings. I'm sure there's a ton of studies that go where to put them. How do you get them to use it?
That's
Or
a really
what
good
is-
question. Yeah, we just put up a sign saying crossing
Right,
this
this
way.
way.
No, it's a great question. I think, what's interesting to me is the animals themselves do not want to use our roadways, right? So some of these crossings, and I just came back from visiting a lot, like there was one on State Route, I almost said the 9. Here's me in Colorado, Wyoming, New Mexico, all these places saying, it's California. When we say a freeway, we say the. So I'm like, the 9. They're like, what are you saying? That's U.S. route. I'm like, can we just say the? It's easier. But nonetheless, not the 9, U.S. State Route 9, which is how they'd say it there. The deer were trying to use it even before it was, before it was finished. 3 days later, they were using it. First, we know from GPS data, like on the Wallis Annenberg or like on the 395, Katie and some of her people even before her were doing studies. I'm blanking on the CDFW scientist's name who retired. Yeah, I know, we're both blanking.
Taylor?
So you have both roadkill data to show where they're crossing, as well as GPS. On the Wallis Annenberg, they were doing GPS data for almost 30 years, and what it showed was the animals were coming up there, and they'd turn around. They're like, I'm not crossing this. I wouldn't cross the 101. I've stood there at 2 a.m. It is one of the world's busiest freeways, 300 to 400,000 cars a day. It's insane. So GPS data, monitoring data. Some of these crossings, though, are put in the only place we can put them, right? Like the Wallis Annenberg, we didn't have much of a choice. There's development here, there's development here. But so in some respects, siting, there's a lot of complex factors. Roadkill is not the only measure. Sometimes an absence of roadkill can be actually a more important measure. That's what was happening with the LA crossing. Nobody was trying to cross, and it caused a genetic blockage, right? But how you get them to use it, we actually have a lot of good science around that. First of all, fencing, what you call exclusionary fencing. So you block off their options. Some of the crossings we visited in Colorado and New Mexico, they had like 18 miles of crossings along the freeway, right? Now you can't block off connectivity for 18 miles or else you have a bigger problem. So they had crossings, I forget, every few miles or something. But so you kind of limit their options. Grading and vegetation. Like one of the tricks with the Wallis Annenberg crossing is we have to get the slope down. Much like us, nobody wants to go uphill, right? So you have to kind of have a gradual approach. But I will just say the animals themselves are really smart. Some friends of ours caught that. You might have seen the viral video of a badger and coyote teaching each other to use a culvert. Word gets out in the animal world. They don't want to cross our roads. So, but those are some tricks we have, and we know how to get them to use it.
I have a question about your favorite animal, the pika. What species has that derived from? Is it a rodent? Is it a rat? Is it a
They are not a
rabbit?
rat.
Or
They're lagomorphs, so they're in the bunny family.
Bunny,
Yeah,
I was
and there
gonna
are
say.
species of them all over the world. There's a teddy bear. If you Google teddy bear pika, oh my God, it's the most adorable. It's like from Asia. Ours is the American pika, but there's pika all over the world again in these high environments. But yeah, they have they are not rodents again. More in common with bunnies. I call them potato bunnies. That's my nickname for it because they're round like a potato. Yeah. Oh yeah. Text me that photo. I'll get back to you. Thanks for coming. Yeah, they're cute. I mean, they're just the cutest animal. They're bunnies, you know. How can they not be cute?
We live in Ventura and have seen the overpass quite regularly. And right now, I think your photo showed that they don't have any ramps yet. And I'm curious how you're going to do the north ramp because it looks like it's up on a very difficult.
Yeah, so we just finished, if I can get back there. What's finished is the structure over the 101.
Right.
Where we're right now is we're working on burying the utility lines, which are in the middle of the between the 101 freeway. Let me get to that slide, and the access road, which we have to cover. Once the utility lines are buried, we're going to then be extending the structure over the 101 freeway. Let me get to that. Dun, dun, dun. It's here somewhere. Where did I talk about it? All the Grinnell stuff. But what you're seeing, we didn't want to connect the structure over the freeway until that other structure is done, because then it would have been a bridge to nowhere for the animals. So, almost there. It's Katie's Crossing. Okay, you can really see it here. So this is what's done right now. This right here is not connected, but there's no structure left. That's just going to be fill is going to be put in there once this section's done.
If you go back one, you said that was one more. Because you had a good overhead of it showing just it looked like a block of right
Yep.
there.
Yeah, exactly.
And
So
that's 2 weeks ago.
probably a couple months ago, but
Okay.
this right here is going to be fill. So this structure's done. That's going to be fill. You're going to put fill here, because right now you can see the walls. You will not be able to see that, which will connect this landscape. So that's what we're not doing until the second piece of the structure's done, which is right here. Does that make sense? So here's the freeway. This is all done. This structure right here needs to be built, which we're starting this summer. Does that make sense?
Thank you.
Yeah, we actually get a lot of questions like, well, the structure's not connected to the landscape. How are the animals going to use it? Yeah, not yet. Although we had a barn owl use it. Flew right over the structure. It was really cool.
Beth, can I ask a question?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah, so one of the things I noticed here during the COVID times was when the traffic flow kind of lessened quite a bit, is, potential effects on wildlife. And that year we went up to Yosemite as part of the mountain yellow-legged frog, helping researchers release frogs. And I was talking to Rob Grasso up there about the effects on the wildlife of the reduction in traffic. And he mentioned to me that something like 20% or some shockingly high number of the percent of the bear population up there is killed every year on that road that crosses Yosemite, so the Tioga Road that goes into Yosemite. And I've driven on that, and people drive pretty crazily. And I wondered, that's a pretty high percentage of the population. Is there any talk about, limiting traffic on that road? I know wildlife crossings are one solution, but limiting traffic being another, especially in a national park.
It's so funny you brought this up, because I literally just screamed at somebody. I was in Tuolumne Meadows coming here and had stopped to take some photos, and I was going, the speed limit, as you know, part of Tuolumne Meadows was 25. I was going 30. And this person from Colorado in a big Jeep starts passing. And I even swore. I rolled down and I'm like, what the F are you doing, right? This is a national park, right? I said that. Because, yeah, I'm very aware, especially when Tioga Road opens, it is a friggin', I mean, the roadkill the day or two it opens, because a lot of those animals have never encountered a car before. Again, this gets back to wildlife crossings are a big solution that does work, but you can't put them everywhere. Rob, who happens to be my neighbor too, have been talking about like the Yosemite toad crossing you saw doing one at Toga Pass. But the only thing that's going to stop the bear slaughter is for people to just friggin' slow down. As someone who used to drive fast, I have a sports car. I don't anymore. I go the speed limit in the park, if not under. Sometimes I do go over the speed limit but I shouldn't on 395. Don't tell Katie I said that. But I think this just gets back to, we have not grappled with the moral cost of driving. And the pandemic wasn't, they had almost zero, which makes sense. You have no cars in the park, roadkill during the pandemic. But when you think of, we don't even know the numbers. It's something like, the number that's often cited is 1 to 2 million large animals a year are killed by our cars. I think that is probably 5 times that, because a lot of animals don't get counted, they go off to die, and then you're not even factoring in the millions and millions and millions of, probably in the billions of smaller stuff, right? Butterfly slaughter, which I feel bad during migration, frogs, you name it. So think about that for a minute. Like, we're okay with our transportation system being that deadly, and again, Ben Goldfarb's book's excellent. But even if you don't like wildlife, 4,000 people just in California every year die on our roads. If that was anything else, it would be a public health crisis. But we're okay with our transportation system eliminating 4,000 people's lives a year. So I don't have an answer for you except for, it's a problem. And now working in road ecology for 14 years, just becoming aware of how monumental a problem it is. And then when you look at our national parks, which are kind of these last or whatever protected areas for wildlife, where the wildlife are still being, pretty much taken out in large numbers. 20% is not a small number by our cars. What do? I don't know, but you're right. It's a huge problem. And it's not just the bears. Like I said, it's, the Yosemite toads, that Toga Pass areas where they experience 90% declines historically. So you're talking about a limited population anyway, and now they're trying, they get across the road, they get mushed. So I hope somebody comes up with the transportation of the future. Katie, did you want to comment? You're someone who, road ecologist here.
Yeah, I actually did my master's thesis on black bears in Yosemite getting hit by cars. So yeah, I can attest. Yeah, we had, I think, an average of 40 bears get hit in the park a year. It's really, terrible. And Tioga Road has the most collisions. I studied all the roads in the park, and I did actually identify roadkill hotspots of bears. So there are very specific areas where they get hit more than they do, in other areas. And they're very small areas, like White Wolf is probably the highest roadkill site in the entire park. There's 2 great meadow systems on either side of the road. Bears in the spring eat lots of grass, and to move up and down in elevation, they pretty much have to cross Tioga Pass. So I identified some locations that also had really poor visibility for drivers. The speed limit's 45, and I did a test where the minimum stopping distance you would need for any object in the road at that speed, and I could tell that I would say over 50% of the road, you could not see the minimum stopping distance for that speed limit. So it technically shouldn't even be that speed limit in a lot of those areas. Speed is definitely a part of it, but traffic. Tioga Roads is only open 6 months out of the year. So, statistically, that's pretty incredible to have that many collisions, but yeah.
Yeah, I hope somebody invents transportation alternatives, because I feel guilty driving these days. I do. It's such an impact on our planet. So somebody come up with something. When they get teleporting down, we'll all be good.
Well, I think we'll let Beth go, but if anyone else has questions,
I'll hang out if you have
a
questions.
little bit, but thank you, Katie.
Thank you for being here.
Beth. Yeah, thank you.